Tsai Ing-wen has deliberately lied about her Ph.D. from the London School of Economics and Political Science. She forged her degree in 1984 and fooled people into thinking she had a thesis. That same year, with the help of the Education Ministry and National Chengchi University, Tsai bypassed proper credential authentication protocols and easily obtained employment as an assistant professor. Using her position as an academic along with her false Ph.D., Tsai made many personal gains. Tsai became a legal consultant even though she was not a certified lawyer. In doing so, she violated the terms of her employment as an educator, which forbade her from taking on other work. She then managed to parlay her position as an educator in the legal field to obtain law credentials. After that, she made her way into politics. Tsai's blatant disregard for academic integrity and her manipulation of power is shameful. She abused the system in an outrageous manner. She became president of Taiwan, but only because she lied her way there. Now that she sits in the country's highest seat of power, Tsai is doing everything to cover her tracks. She does so without regard to morality or integrity. Tsai has no problem dismantling Taiwan's democracy in the process. With establishment support in one hand and the government's vast resources in the other, Tsai controls the country's courts and administrative bodies. She has cultivated a cyber army to bring public opinion to her side. Her shameless behavior and destruction of social values knows no bounds. In any other democratic country, anyone exposed for doing something so brash would immediately confess and face punishment in court. A country with values and a healthy sense of shame would have already condemned such a wrongdoer as an obligation to the people. However, in Taiwan, Tsai shamelessly does not own up to her illegal behavior. She acts as a dictator. She gaslights the people and distorts people's perception of justice. She wields the justice system and uses it as a weapon to attack honest truth seekers. She has turned the truth on its head and abused justice. There is no greater crime than that. How did Taiwan get here? Perhaps it's the corruption of our moral values. Or perhaps it's because of selfish people and their greed that the country has landed in this position. Or maybe people are cowed by the fear of communism. Everything Tsai has done is so flagrant, so out of line, and so unbelievable that many people choose not to believe these things are happening. Perhaps this is why the vast majority of people don't know the truth or are not aware of Tsai's wrongdoing. Tsai's history of criminal activity has been thoroughly proven. A president does not need to have a Ph.D. However, a president cannot lie to the people. People's apathy and unfamiliarity with Tsai's criminal history only benefits Tsai. This will come back and damage society exponentially. That's why we have created this educational short film. We will not only describe Tsai's wrongdoing in detail, but also present proof that she has committed crimes. We will clearly explain and unmuddle the truth. Justice will be served, and the country will at last be safe. Tsai Ing-wen's father started from humble beginnings. He was good with his hands and earned what he could. His story should be one that inspires. However, he was involved with unsavory businesses, and through that he got to interact with high-level government officials. That's how he made it big. One has to bear the sins of their dark past. Tsai Ing-wen is the youngest of 11 children. Her family dynamic was complex. Siblings had to vie for their own interests and forge alliances to outperform others. In such a big family, that is how individuals fought for their place. From a young age, Tsai has been no stranger to using deception and cunning to look out for her own well-being. Tsai Ing-wen knew the value of personal relationships. She knew her father dealt in unsavory exchanges and, as a result, knew that if she wanted to stand out, she'd have to get into politics. That way, she could expand her family's power and guarantee their financial success. At the same time, it could scrub clean the Tsai clan's otherwise flawed reputation. After completing her unremarkable education in Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen went to study in the US and UK at the behest of her father, even though she did not like to study. Unfortunately, she couldn't make the cut and failed her school exams. On November 10, 1982, she withdrew from her course at the London School of Economics, resulting in a WD status. In March 1983, Tsai Ing-wen returned to Taiwan. She looked for a teaching job at National Chengchi University, a school that the ruling KMT ran at the time. With only a master's from Cornell University, Tsai Ing-wen could only qualify for lecturer positions. A lecturer would have to work tirelessly for years before they'd stand out in any capacity. It was at this point that Tsai Ing-wen decided to take the easy way out. She pretended to have a Ph.D. degree and became an assistant professor. Her career would be so much easier and it would open so many more doors for her. Tsai Ing-wen's first bid to get hired by NCCU was rejected, so she relented and went to the less impressive Soochow University. She barely had to lift a finger to become an adjunct lecturer. This was just a temporary post for her, a starting point for her greater ambitions. Afterwards, the presidential office would apply pressure on the National Science Council, the Education Ministry, and National Chengchi University. It worked. On August 7, 1984, the Education Ministry sent a letter to NCCU. The ministry said that it was responding to a request from the Science Council. The ministry recommended that NCCU accept Tsai Ing-wen into a special program which would allow her to be treated as an assistant professor at the school. The ministry told NCCU to vet Tsai's credentials and asked the school to send a copy of Tsai's degree. It's clear at this point that the ministry appointed Tsai to NCCU without even seeing her degree first. On September 24, 1984, NCCU held a faculty review. When it came time for Tsai Ing-wen's review, the school's headmaster directly hired her as a visiting assistant professor of law. There was no discussion, no presentation of credentials, or mention of her thesis. After getting hired at NCCU, it was time for credential validation. On September 28, 1984, Tsai Ing-wen wrote on her own employment form that the title of her thesis was Law of Subsidies, Dumping, and Market Safeguards. However, that title is different from the one provided by the University of London and the Government of Taiwan, which is Unfair Trade Practices and Safeguard Actions. On September 21, 1984, NCCU indicated that Tsai Ing-wen did not have a thesis. The Education Ministry originally intended to get Tsai Ing-wen employed as a visiting assistant professor. At the faculty review, Tsai Ing-wen was indeed examined as a visiting faculty member. However, on October 28, 1985, the Education Ministry sent a letter to NCCU saying that it reviewed Assistant Professor Tsai Ing-wen's credentials, not visiting professor, but full-time assistant professor. Furthermore, her tenure was retroactively rolled back to August 1984. On NCCU's employment form for Tsai Ing-wen, not only does it not mention a thesis, but for the section that specifies the nature of her employment, the visiting part of her title appears in a different font. These irregularities are particularly jarring. The devil is in the details. Originally, Tsai's capacity as a visiting instructor was just a cover for her lack of relevant qualifications. That way, Tsai could bypass the rigorous qualification requirements. But once enough time had passed, Tsai was quietly turned into a full-time member of the faculty. The Education Ministry cooperated with such efforts. NCCU never audited Tsai's credentials. The Education Ministry doesn't hold her education records either. NCCU used Tsai's capacity as visiting faculty to bamboozle the public. The evidence attesting to this plot was sealed away by the Education Ministry in July 2019 for 30 years. The Education Ministry said it invoked powers granted to it by an administrative manual to classify Tsai's documents until December 31, 2049. Not even judicial institutions can see the classified documents. Only by doing this can Tsai's position be guaranteed. The Taipei Administrative High Court heard a case requesting that these documents be declassified and publicized. However, the Administrative High Court ruled the following. 1. The Education Ministry already released enough documents that could fulfill the complainant's request. 2. The Education Ministry returned the copies of the thesis and degree it had to Tsai Ing-wen. 3. The complainant, Professor He Defen, had no right to request the sensitive documents. The case is currently in appeal. In 1987, Tsai Ing-wen secured her position as an assistant professor. After that, she set her eye on law firms. Tsai got a law credential from the United States and started working on cases there. In 1996, Tsai used her assistant professor credential to get a lawyer certification in Taiwan. Once she succeeded, she began climbing the political ladder. In 1984 and 1987, someone must have lodged a report about the authenticity of Tsai's Ph.D. Taiwan's Overseas Representative Office was asked to look into the matter several times, but the request did not produce definitive answers. That doesn't change the fact that the truth deserves to be heard. This fraudulent behavior must be thoroughly examined, the lies must be revealed, and justice must be served. In 2007, Taiwan's representative to the UK, Catherine Chang, and Shi Fanglong received 480,000 British pounds. Their mission was to establish the Taiwan Research Program at LSE and establish a good working relationship with the school. In 2011, a 5-person group made up of Xie Ziwei, Xiao Meiqin, Catherine Chang, Chen Ximai, and Zhang Xianghui traveled to Europe. Their trip on paper was to find out more about green energy projects in the region. However, the trip included a stop at LSE to attempt to smuggle a copy of a thesis into the school's library. That attempt failed. However, the group managed to meet up with former LSE director Anthony Giddens. In 2015, a third version of Tsai's diploma surfaced. That same year, an entry for Tsai's thesis was created in the British Library's Ethos database. However, crucial information like the supervisor for the thesis was listed as unavailable. On May 20, 2019, Professor He Defeng questioned the legitimacy of Tsai Ing-wen's degree during a press conference. He wanted answers to the many holes in Tsai's education. Since then, the government has been working to patch up those holes with shoddy evidence. On June 10th and June 11th, Li Zongzi and Wang Dingyu posted Tsai Ing-wen's 2015 diploma on Facebook. On June 28th, the presidential office faxed a thesis to LSE's Women's Library. With a thesis at the school, the government then asked Taiwan's National Central Library to also accept a copy of the thesis Tsai sent to LSE. Tsai always said that the University of London somehow lost her thesis. However, none of the schools she's worked at has ever kept a copy of her thesis or her diploma. Is that also because of the University of London? On July 10th, Tsai showed a diploma during a talk at the internet company Dcard. That diploma did not have a serial number and was clearly faked. Afterwards, Tsai's cyber army, including Li, Wang, the DPP, and the North American Taiwanese Professors Association all claimed that Tsai's thesis detractors are agents of China. In July, the Education Ministry issued several press releases and held several press conferences to attest to the authenticity of the thesis sent to LSE. The Education Ministry even testified as much during multiple legislative hearings. At the same time, Tsai classified her education files until December 31st, 2049, a period longer than what's allowed for even the most sensitive of state secrets. On August 29th, Dr. Huan Xilin traveled to London to announce the findings of an investigation he conducted. He requested that Tsai Ing-wen come forward and explain the problems with her education history. On September 4th, Tsai sued Dr. Lin and Professor He Defeng for libel. On September 14th, Dr. Dennis Pang was added to the lawsuit as well. On September 21st, former Judge Liu Tiezhen backed Tsai Ing-wen. He said he not only saw Tsai's thesis, but he was also the one responsible for hiring Tsai. Tsai, in her effort to cover up her crime, somehow coerced a great judge to lie on her behalf. After almost 1 year of waiting, prosecutors finally held the first examination hearing in the case. During this time, several government agencies conspired to manufacture evidence. For example, in 1984, 2 of the Education Ministry's requests went unanswered. The Education Ministry followed up on August 20, 1985, with another request to look into Tsai's credentials. In 1987, the Education Ministry sent another request for information about Tsai's credentials to the UK Representative Office at the behest of the Examination Ministry. This request asked for the nature of Tsai's corroborating documents, her student information, her duration of study, degree information, and additional information from LSE's records. National Chengchi University supposedly sent a copy of Tsai's degree to the Education Ministry on September 13, 1984. That means the ministry should have seen Tsai's degree for the first time in mid-September. However, for some reason, the Education Ministry asked the UK Representative Office for more information on Tsai's credentials as early as June 21, 1984. That request received a response on July 10, 1984. The answer appeared in court files on May 1, 2021. It was a handwritten note containing a few words accounting for Tsai's education. Furthermore, the response was processed through the Representative Office's press attaché and not the Representative Office itself. More shocking is a letter written by one P.C. Kennedy. Kennedy was supposedly answering on behalf of an A.M. Amos. Kennedy backed Tsai's education. However, there are many different versions of the P.C. Kennedy letter. Some have signatures, others don't. Also, the letter's formatting is also unusual. However, according to Dr. Lin's research, both Kennedy and Amos are ghosts. Additionally, American independent journalist Michael Richardson launched inquiries with the ICO in the UK to obtain Tsai's examiner and viva information. In response to these inquiries, the ICO claimed that revealing such information would result in damage and distress to Tsai. LSE's low-level administrators are working with Tsai Ing-wen. They publicly said Tsai's viva took place on October 16, 1983. Then, LSE's staff also said Tsai's examiners were Michael J. Elliott and Leonard H. Lee. The schools in London cooperated with Tsai, saying that they had somehow lost her thesis. For whatever reason, the schools have no problem sullying the integrity of academia. Finally, after more information came to light, both the University of London and LSE denied ever having Tsai's thesis or her viva report. They never published her thesis, nor did they ever give out 1.5 or 2 degrees. The truth is clear as day. The perpetrators, however, refuse to admit their wrongdoing. However, the presidential office can no longer rely on the University of London or LSE to provide cover for them. Tsai Ing-wen is not above going to great lengths to get what she wants. She forges evidence, manipulates the courts, dispatches her confidants, and removes insubordinate people to achieve her objective. What's worse is that her cousin-in-law is the head of the High Administrative Court. Her close friend is in charge of justice personnel. Tsai has a tight grip on national security and has secured her position as a dictator. Tsai uses the law to intimidate those that dare go against her. She hands out warrants and refuses to hold hearings. She is abusing the law and violating human rights. She is writing the ugliest history this country has ever seen. Separation of powers, checks and balances, judicial independence, freedom of speech, and human rights are the cornerstones of democracy. Taiwan's hard-earned democratic legacy has been undone by Tsai Ing-wen. Advanced education is not a prerequisite for becoming president. However, a liar cannot be president. It's time that justice and virtue are restored. That is what everyone deserves.